Is out front?
I'm glad they got my note for my theme music.
That's right.
Whenever I go into a room, I like that particular song to play.
All right.
It makes me feel at home.
It brought us right there. Well, thank you very much for being with us. I decided that I should do a little reading, obviously, before we did this. And I read a bunch of things where people were asking you what you were trying to tell readers and listeners and viewers with Vox. So I wanted to turn it around. And what are readers telling you? You've been around now for what, 4+? And
4.5.
4.5?
Yeah.
So what are they telling you?
That I want to try to think about what they're telling us. Yeah. So, look, our audience likes us, but the thing is broken. The system, the media, politics. I just brought out a podcast today with Jay Rosen where we're talking about this. I try to listen very closely for what the mood of our audience is. Not how they just feel about us. Oftentimes they feel like something you get now, right? Which I don't feel like I got back at the Washington Post. I don't feel like was the way people reacted to what we were doing at the American Prospect is, thank God. This is like one sane place. You make me feel like I'm not crazy. And what I hear in there is some amount of compliment to us, sure, thank you, but also like a creeping existential dread. Sorry, not creepy, like a galloping existential dread. And I think it should be understood as something that the media and the political system together are creating and failing to quell. And so I'm worried about the state of the audience. I'm glad they like us, but there's some broader job we need to be doing for them, not just Vox, but the media in general, the political system in general, that we're failing at.
Well, you took a bet on a combination of long form, deep dives into particular subjects, but also with a sort of cultural that's certainly much more lighthearted, but which you can dance, and which some critics would have said, at least in the beginning, was just fluff. And I'm curious about that balance. How do you view that in terms of those readers who, and I would not say fickle either, but they're judgmental and they want what they want. How do you make that balance between those deep dives and a quick look at something that's a clothing trend or something that is not exactly the healthcare issue?
I have a different view on this. I think that one of our jobs at Vox, but I think about this in the media generally, I don't think it's unique to us, is we try to take the topics that the world understands to be important and complex and make them appealing and clear, right? That's healthcare.
There you go.
People think that healthcare is beyond what they can understand, right? Like that's the great trick the devil pulled on politics, making you think that you can't understand it. And we try to unwind that. We try to say, no, like this is not more complicated than anything else. The flip is true in culture, in fashion, in food, consumer, in food. Like the trick there is we take these things that are central to our existence as human beings and say they're light, they're fluff, like you should feel bad if you're reading about them. And we try to treat them with the importance and complexity and nuance that we do when we're talking about healthcare. On some level, I think we're trying to correct what we see as a cultural mistake on both sides. Like the important stuff isn't actually that complicated. And the entertaining stuff isn't that, is both not that simple, but it's also not soft. It's not fluff. Like this is where our culture is expressing itself. Like we need to take that seriously and see into it deeply.
And I don't know if you were involved in the decisions of what was on the front today, but I took a quick look at that, and it's a really interesting mix. There's a story on Trump threatening again to send the military to the border with Mexico, which I found an interesting sort of on the news but off the news. It's not the thing everybody's talking about, but it's certainly something we're talking about generally. It's right above a nice read on the 10 ways the world might end, which I thought was fascinating. It's right above a piece on Harvard admission policies in Asian Americans. And then just below that is a wonderful piece, I have to tell you, it drew me right in, a long look at candy sales, up to like $6.9 billion this year. That is an amazing mix of stories if we're trying to target a certain group or a certain, what went into the editorial decisions about that particular mix? Now, it's surrounded by maybe 14 or 15 other things that were entry points, as we would call them.
That is a great question.
Yeah. Sorry.
that as editor at large, I'm not as... I can tell you more about what went into the mix of sections behind that. So let me maybe talk about that. What's great, what I'm so excited that you just did, was you mentioned two of the sections we just launched. So one of them is Future Perfect, which is the first vertical, the first section anywhere that is built on top of effective altruism concerns, and I'll talk about what that is. That's the story about 10 ways the world might end. One thing that effective altruism, which is this movement of trying to look at how do you prevent the most suffering in the world based on the best evidence at the least cost. And one thing that that movement has prioritized is the idea of existential risk. Given how many human lives we expect there to be in the future, anything that creates even a very small diminution in that cuts down the risk that there won't be those lives is huge. So, how do scientists think the world might end?
Bill Gates, I think.
I did, yes, partially about this. Then the goods, which is where that candy store story came from, which is trying to take a deeper, more culturally rich lens on consumerism and consumer choices and what they reflect about us. It's one way for us of attacking the business question, the business section. I'm sorry, and then you brought up Dara's piece about the wall, and whether or not that was what everybody's talking about. One of our theses right now is that there's a lot of talk about like fascism and the end of democracy. There's a lot of talk that I actually consider overheated. But one of the things that I don't know that we in the media have done very well, or that we in politics have understood that clearly, is that the level on which Donald Trump operates most aggressively is the level of attention. He imposes his will much more uniquely and distinctively and effectively upon attention than he does upon Congress or upon the machinery of the federal government. And so one of the things we're thinking a lot about is not letting Twitter be our assignment editor. Not letting the thing everybody's talking about be the thing we're talking about just because it's a thing everybody's talking about. There is this deep circularity to a lot of journalism. And so one of the questions we're trying to ask is how do we create sections, how do we create internal culture that gives us some principles level view of what we think is important? Not to say that what everybody's talking about is important, and it is, but it is often not the only thing that's important. What nobody's talking about sometimes really does need attention. Future Perfect, the EA vertical, is one way of thinking about that. How do we reduce suffering in the world? You know what? I'm going to take the strong stand and say that's important. Like, we think that's important. But also policy over politics a lot of the time. Not always, but a lot of the time. I think this is a struggle that we are engaged in. I think it's something that a lot of others in the media are engaged in. I think that we sort of looked up at some point and said, we are being led around too much. And like, we need to think about how not to just, journalistic herd behavior is getting worse because of Twitter, because of competitive pressure, because of how we've all evolved. Yeah. What are the structures we need to build internally to make sure that we are thinking about this for ourselves?
And you've done that successfully, even though in an awful lot of newsrooms, there's that little tracer on what's getting the most attention. Mm-hmm. And
we got that too,
and we're
Sharpie.
And I'm curious, how do you avoid what I uncharitably, this poor family, which I've now used for a number of years, the Kardashian effect, which is every story about the Kardashian goes to the top of everything because it's an eyeball. It's not even clickbait anymore. It's just almost like a de rigueur. You've got to have that story. You don't do that, from what I can. I mean,
well, thank you.
But which is a real puzzle. Not just Kardashians, by the way. But I mean, you have become successful without that. I will tell you that one of the great questions when I was in the newspaper business, you've heard of those. It was a paper thing that you opened, and was somebody asked me one day that I thought that this is where I marked the death of print, or the start of the death, was when's the last time I was surprised by something I read in the newspaper? And I went, I will tell you more often than not, there's at least one story when I call you up that I'm surprised to see.
I'm happy to hear that.
And why? How do you achieve that? I mean, if we can bottle that, we'll all drink that stuff. But I mean, how does your team, how do you achieve that?
So one, I'm going to take, because you're asking me such nice questions, I'm going to be more self-critical.
Oh, I've got a couple more. I'm just softening you out. Don't worry.
I don't think we succeed at that every day. I still find us a little bit more, maybe part of the answer to your question is that because we're very self-critical of this, we're alert to it.
Okay.
I worry about whether or not we are independent enough in our vision of what the news should be. I think we are more independent than certainly a lot of people are. I think more independent than we could be. We do not sit around deciding our coverage priorities by what's on CrowdTangle or what's on Chartbeat, right? Like, that's something we don't do. But I do find, particularly in politics, a kind of totalizing like convergence on the same couple of stories. Again, we're trying to pull away from that. Like one way we do it is that I do think we consider things news that other people don't consider news. Like we spend a lot of time looking at studies. If you looked at like the piece I wrote today, it's about a study, which I thought was wonderful, about how if you pay Democrats and Republicans on Twitter to follow the other side for a month, they become more polarized, not less. Yeah. It's like, there's a question, is that news? Should that crowd out something else you're covering? For us, it did. So I think, and that goes a little bit to some of these sections we're building and like how we think about them and what we were talking before we came out, how early on when you launched USA Today, very quickly, there developed an internal culture of what is a USA Today story. Very quickly and very deeply in Vox, there's a culture of what is a Vox story. And one thing a Vox story is explanatory. So one thing that is helpful for us is that if there is something that we don't feel we understand well enough to explain, with the exception of it being something unbelievably gigantic where we need to put an update up, like, you know, like San Francisco had an earthquake and cracked off and is now in the sea.
Yeah. No, it's okay, relax.
Breaking news.
Breaking news, yeah, literally. Yeah.
But I think I have at least some culture of taking a breath on that and trying to understand it. And also the way we do explanatory journalism is by trying to think about what are things part of? What is this new piece of information part of? What is the larger context of it? If like the thing coming across Twitter that just happened is like a puzzle piece, how do we tell you about the broader puzzle? So sometimes we're covering what other people are covering, but it feels a little fresher because we are trying to zoom it out in a way that maybe people aren't expecting.
So here's snarky question number one, and I'll ask it the way Mike Wallace used to ask those questions, which is, it's not my question, but a lot of people are asking.
A lot of people are saying, yeah.
Yeah, that you rely too much on studies, that you hide bias by saying a report says or a study says. And I looked at the last few days, and there are a number of a report says. When you choose those things, do you do that with a point of view in mind? I mean, I think the average person might say you tilt left or progressive. Do you do that let me ask the question.
Yeah.
Is that how you sneak in opinion and bias?
I would say a couple things. One is that I don't think we sneak in opinion.
Yeah, okay.
One thing we believe in being is transparent. When we have views, we tell you what they are. My quarrel with quote-unquote objective journalism is that it was never objective. There are all these ways people are sneaking in bias.
Bias, even the way you select a story to cover.
The way you select a story, who you quote. I've worked in big newsrooms. My friends and my partner have worked in many newsrooms. I've watched the same story, or I've written the same story in the news section as news analysis and in the op-ed section. It's how you construct it. So one, I don't believe that there are things free of bias. What I do believe is that there's transparency or opacity. I do want to say, I do think that stories can have neutral processes, which is different than having an even-handed outcome.
Explain that.
We try to be, one thing I tell my reporters is that it's okay if you're reporting on something to have come to an answer on it. If the question is, will tax cuts pay for themselves? Or does Obamacare cancel existing insurance plans? There's an answer to those questions. Come to it. But if you've not done the work to come to that answer, if you've not talked to people who have good arguments on both sides of that answer, you don't have the authority yet to give an answer. So I think that I used to have this line at I shouldn't say at the Post, it's about everything, but that the way we divided news and opinion made it too hard for the news side to tell the truth and too easy for the opinion side to lie. The news side wasn't able to tell you what they found, and there were no standards on the opinion side at all, because it was opinion. Everybody's got one. If this is yours, then that's all we're asking. That is not our bar. We have a much higher bar. You've asked a corollary question of that, though, which is, are studies a way of sneaking in bias? I would like to say, and I believe it's true, that studies are a way of sneaking in rigor. Studies are a way of covering things with a higher level of methodological capability than we can do in day-to-day journalism.
Some kind of factual basis to a story.
Yes, which isn't to say studies should be covered uncritically, and certainly you can choose them so they only support what you say. But I'll give you an example, the weeds this week. We did a study, we saw it come across the National Bureau of Economic Research, and it was about when Tennessee canceled 175,000, if I'm remembering correctly, Medicaid enrollments. Right. Did that reduce or increase employment? And this study confirmed our biases initially. right? It did not increase employment, did not make people work harder. But as we looked into the study, we noticed that it was in conflict with a previous study, which said that those cancellations had increased work after they happened. So we called the author of that previous study, and then Sarah, Sarah Cliff, an amazing healthcare reporter, she got this author's 11-page response to the study, and our whole segment was about the dispute between these two studies. And I actually think our view is sort of to the side of both of them, which was, well, it's complicated. But I think we try to be pretty rigorous about this stuff. I do. I do think it's always true that you can sneak in a lot just by choosing what you cover, and I wouldn't say Vox is immune to its coverage decisions reflecting the values of individual reporters, or even to some degree the values of the institution. Yeah. But I think that's true everywhere.
And you raise a point when you talked about individual reporters. One of the things that I've been looking at was that, and I don't know the answer, this is not a setup, is Vox an entity which then brings in people who can do the things that they want, or is it a collection of people who are independent contractors in the sense that they bring that expertise, and your job is to sort of just say, let's go over here. We're going to, at some point, you turn a story in and we post it or post a podcast. That's a very different system than we had, where you hired in, moved through a hierarchy, learned the expertise. Rarely did you really bring that in, except maybe in the financial side of the house.
I think, well, the answer both is always the worst answer to give to something. But let me give it, but I'd say it's a two-stage question. So when we hire, what are we hiring for? And one of the things we are looking for specifically when we hire is subject issue expertise. We will often choose someone with more subject issue expertise over someone with more journalistic experience. I can teach people to pick up the phone. I can teach people to attend events or to go knock on someone's door. I can teach you journalism. I can't teach you Dara Lynn's level of care and obsession with immigration policy. I can't teach you Sarah Cliff's level of interest and seriousness and dedication to understanding healthcare policy. I can't teach you the way Andrew Prokop looks at the world and the rigor with which he thinks about politics. Some of that has to be there. But from there, I would say, and one nice thing about Vox is I don't think it always looks like you read it and it all just seems normal on some level, it goes down smooth. It takes people about 6 months to learn how we do our work. Explanatory reporting is different than the reporting people are trained to do. The way we structure articles, what we see, this whole that we're always, I'm having a, actually, I'm not going to say this because I'm having a baby.
Oh, go ahead.
And
Great.
A friend of mine, and one of our editors said, you're just going to be sitting with a kid being like, zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. When we talk to people, when we talk to our reporters, there are things that we are asking them to do that others are not.
Yeah.
And that takes time to learn, and it takes time to be able to do it rapidly and on your own.
What's the best Vox story?
The best Vox story we've ever done, or the best, just like
I'll
the
take either one.
archetypal?
Pick one as an example, but archetypal in either order. Because you may just not have got to perfection yet. So.
Well, we've never gotten to perfection. That much is true. I would say the one that immediately came to mind is for our Netflix show, Explained. We did a story there on DNA editing, and it was led by Joss Fong.
Yes.
And it was about designer DNA. It was about technologies like CRISPR, which are allowing people to send in basically viral loads that very, very precisely edit DNA. And I think as
sort of do it in the mall,
explanatory,
as I remember that.
I'm sorry?
Sort of do it in the mall, as I remember that story.
There you
CRISPR
go.
was out there.
As a piece of explanatory journalism, taking something complex and without reducing its complexity, making it clear, tying it to individual stories, and being open to the difficulties and nuances in it. The story, to some degree, has point of view on some things, but it basically leaves a lot of questions unsolved and unanswered. They are just questions. We don't know the answers or values. I think that was a really remarkable piece of work.
When you got to the end of that, I had that sense of there are a lot of unanswered questions, but it wasn't because of the work that you had done or a fault of the story.
Yeah.
We just heard that we're at that point in the development of the process.
We think of success in an explainer as the question of, can you follow this going forward? That is success for us. There are places that are built where success, what do you get yelled at as a reporter for, is an interesting question. And at a lot of places you get yelled at if you didn't have it first. What we're trying to do is break the news. What we're trying to do is have the thing. For us, success is we've taken somebody from curiosity to understanding. That's like the internal language. And when we do that, now you can read everything else on the story, watch anything else on the story, listen, whatever it is. Now you can follow CRISPR going forward.
Right.
And if I saw somebody do that better than us, that's when I would get upset at a reporter.
Here's another fawning, sympathetic question, sorry. But in truth, people who know you say that among your best qualities is that you were able to synthesize a tremendous amount of information very quickly and come back out with a sort of coherent explanation or opinion on it. And in all seriousness, that is one of the things I think people would say, whether it's behind your back or in front of you. And you've
People
shown
always
that
talking behind my back about my synthesizing capabilities.
Yeah, well, it's that whispered cocktail party
Gossip.
chatter, it happens. But truthfully, that's one of the things you're known for. How, is that a conscious thing? Is that something you just brought to yourself? Have you trained yourself? It is a unique quality that many people don't have.
I don't know. I do think I've trained myself in that. I find the world hard to understand. And I think like as a kid, I found it hard to understand. And like I genuinely did not do well in school. Not like, I got a 3.7. Like I graduated high school with a 2.2. I didn't listen well. And so I kind of had to like understand things in my own way. And I think doing that was really good practice for journalism. The thing that I focus on very naturally, what I come to naturally as a reporter, what interests me, is what is the question? A friend of mine calls it the hinge question.
Okay.
What is a question where if you answer it one way or another, your whole view of something changes? What is a question at a core of an issue? And then if I can focus the reader on the question, then I can do it. I had an editor, Mark Schmidt, who said that what I was good at as a young reporter, this is the American Prospect, was I would learn about things and then I would take the reader on the same journey of learning. I don't know that I'm better at it than other people. I think I see more how the journey is journalism than some of my peer group does. And I think some of that comes from having come into this through blogging. I did not come into it as a journalist. Right. I did not intend to be a journalist. I blogged a lot.
At the Post?
No. In high school. I'm sorry, in college. I was an early blogger. That's how I got my job at the American Prospect. And I was blogging long before I was ever writing real journalism.
What were you blogging about?
Just politics. It was like uninformed musings of an 18-year-old. But when I look back on it, I see myself in it. It doesn't read all that different, actually. And the work of blogging, you'll see this in a Matt Iglesias and a Kevin Drum and a lot of people, it's an iterative building of understanding. And so the work of blogging is also a work of synthesis. Like the thing that you are trying to do is pull together ideas, threads, and come up with an understanding of them. Now, like over time, like I developed a lot of journalistic rigor in that. I didn't have that when I started out. But I think that's been training. I don't know that it's so natural. And I do think a lot of other people do it. I see people who I think are much better at this than me. They can tell me this much better, but they don't see it as a story clearly. One of the things I'm good at as an editor is seeing that this is a story. It's a kind of journalism. Whereas I think a lot of people who go into more traditional journalistic training, they're taught to jump that step. That's a step they're doing behind the scenes. And what they give to the reader is like the finished product. It's post-synthesis. Mm-hmm. I don't do that. And I think that's the thing people are reacting to there.
I think if you took a lot of assessments of readers, news consumers, viewers, listeners, whatever you want to call them today, the characteristic a lot of people attach to them is short attention span theater. What you do seems counterintuitive to that approach. Is Vox success predicated on a niche, and sort of short attention span theater goes somewhere else? Or are you really reaching for that broader audience? Do you see a depth that others don't see?
I believe that one of the worst things in journalism is that we blame the audience for our failures. We take important things and we make them complicated or boring, and then people don't read them or don't like them. And then we say, they just want Kardashians. And at every place I have been, part of the work I've been trying to do and the people around me have been trying to do is show that's not true. Wonk Blog was at the Washington Post. It competed with celebrity blogs. It competed with horse race politics blog or sites, verticals, whatever you want to call it. And we had the highest traffic. You can make, people are interested in things that are important to them. They are. You just have to do the work. You have to meet them halfway. And we are now Like we have on YouTube more than 5 million, or I'm sorry, about 5 million subscribers. We have a 60% completion rate on our explainers on YouTube. These are 7, 8, 9-minute, 12-minute things. Our Netflix show had extraordinarily high binge rates and continues to have them. I do not believe that attitude about the audience is right. Like, I think it's wrong. And it's not to say quick content isn't good or people don't like it. It's just to say there's also a dimension of what we're training people to do. I've been reading a lot of early American history, and I've been thinking a little bit about how much we had an oral culture, right? How much, like the classic example is the Lincoln-Douglas debates, where people would come out for 5 hours to listen to these two men debate. And you go look at early American history, people are just constantly jumping up and giving these super long speeches. Alexander Hamilton is talking for 6 hours. Like, the attention span of the audience isn't fixed. It's responsive to the world they're in. Now, do I think it's possible our attention spans, including mine, are getting smaller? I do think that's possible. I'm very worried about attention as a resource and what we're training people to do with it. But this idea that the audience wants it all to be short, like, I just don't see it. And it's not been reflected in anything I've done or been part of. And I've looked at a lot of sites that seem to have that kind of quality to them, and they don't in the long run survive.
Yeah, permit me a moment of kinship. I remember with USA Today, of course, we were roundly attacked for short attention span, tiny little stories, but we were building information into graphics. We were taking information, and I used to argue with an old line that we added new depth to the term shallow. That we were giving you actually as much information, say, about a presidential press conference, but we're doing a short story, and it wasn't just Congressman said, Congressman said, Congressman said. We were taking issues over here and maybe doing point by point in a graphic. One of the things, and that was a dramatic change from the way a lot of people, they thought the longer the story, the better. One of the things I've noticed, shifting text to video, to moving to podcasts, is that maybe a new way to get that depth material to an audience where their ability to withstand text, if you will, is shorter? Is that a reaction to that?
No, I don't think so.
Why is that happening?
So a couple things I should say here. One is that I always want to be very careful about this. We never pivoted to video. Like, take away anything, we never did that.
A lot of people have written that you did, but no.
Well, I would like to light that term on fire. It's like one of the worst things journalism has done. We were publishing videos before we were publishing text at Vox. YouTube has always, from the outset, been arguably the platform people spent the most time with us on, certainly aside from our site. We've always had a video team growing alongside the newsroom. And the thing that we did, which is different than a lot of places, is that video team was always its own journalistic entity. We do not ask them, demand of them, and we do not drive them to do Vox articles as videos. They do their own journalism. When there's space for collaboration, the two sides collaborate, but they're like collaborating out of opportunity, not necessity. So one thing is that I think that a lot of text journalism looks down on video. It just does. Also, a lot of video is bad because we did it badly. But if you do it well, like our YouTube page is very, very deeply substantive. The amount of information coming through it is very, very high. And people love it. I think it's some of the best work we do. We've done podcasts more recently. Right. That is something that we've only really built out over the last 2 years. It's been a huge space of growth for us. And what I love about that is its complexity. I love that, like, I have an interview show. You can have 90 minutes of interviewing, and people are there with you. 300, 400, 500,000 people download each episode, and they're there for 90 minutes. I mean, the completion rates are incredible. But I do think that part of the explosion of interest in podcasts is a reaction to everything else getting too short and too packaged. We've not seen any difference in how people are reacting to text, completion rates, none of that. I think a lot of what happened, I mean, this has been coming out, you guys are probably all pretty aware of it, but Facebook was inflating video metrics very aggressively. The data was all wrong. And by the way, it was wrong during a period in which they knew it was wrong for a couple of months. Like, there's a great Neiman Lab article about this. And so all these people are saying, God, Facebook is telling us all anybody wants is a super fast silent autoplay video, and it just wasn't. Yeah. People didn't go to Facebook for video. When they saw it there, what they wanted was shorter. But in places where people watch video, they watch, I mean, look at the stuff that does well on Netflix, these deep documentaries, and look at the kind of text that does well everywhere. It's actually, I mean, the New York Times, us, like the groups that have been rising, we're having our highest traffic numbers ever. It's substantive. Yeah. as the world gets more complex and more alarming, people actually want help. Like, they're willing to meet us halfway if we do a good job for them.
As a study I read recently said, actually even video games are building more text into action games because there's a desire to know more about it. They're like a Battle of Britain game.
Video games are incredibly complex.
There's more, want to know what plane that was and what was happening on that day around when you still get to shoot down the plane, but you need to know more of the context. It's an interesting, because there's so much, particularly with whatever the younger reader is, I hate that term, but there seems to be that desire for more information, and you're packaging it in a way that seems consumable by them.
Yeah, look, like, I think a lot of people are doing this well. I think there's a lot of great journalism happening. But I do a lot of college speaking. It's really mostly the only kind of speaking I do. And I am stunned by the thoughtfulness of kids. Like, when I go to high schools, I am stunned by the thoughtfulness of the kids. Like they want to know, they want to be informed, and like, they're going to places where they can. Even the stuff they're doing on YouTube, they're sitting around watching these 2.5-hour chat shows on YouTube and podcasts. They're listening to these long, deep, detailed things. You got to do a good job, but it's just we should respect the audience. Like, ads need to respect the audience. Like, journalism needs to respect the audience. When you don't respect the audience, they feel it. Like, they know.
That's it.
Then they react to you that way. They stop trusting you. They go elsewhere. Or they click on you, but they don't really like it. They feel tricked. Like, this stuff, it works for a minute, and then it stops. Like,
I was at a high school in Pennsylvania a week ago today, and there was a period of questions, and these kids lined up. It's a PBS live broadcast. They're just, it was
amazing.
They put Morning Joe and Face the Nation to shame because they
Way
had
better
very
than
complex
news
questions about, particularly on freedoms, bullying online, and legislation. And I'm sitting there going, "Whoa, I'm in the wrong. You need to be up here, in that chair." It was a remarkable, and you see it over and over again, particularly even at UC College. I'm looking a lot of times at a high school level.
Yeah.
And there is a depth. Now there's a lot of distractions at the same time. How do you avoid that distraction factor? Because you want a lot of what we might have called dwell time. You want people to stay.
Yeah.
How do you avoid people seeing that headline on the candy story, catch the first 4 lines, and bang, they're out?
Well, once they're
worry about it.
Once they're in the story, if we've done a good job, they're going to stay in it, right? Like, that's on us. Once they're in the story, there's not that much to distract them. Our pages are not distracting. You all may know Vox has this product Concert where we have built like sort of cross-platform, very premium programmatic advertising. So they're getting ads that are good, that like fit the kind of content. We don't have like flashing belly fat ads or something around them. So like, that's one thing. But the other is that I do think that, like, I don't think we've solved distraction.
Yeah.
I think the world is getting very distracting. I spend a lot of time worrying about my own distraction. I've gotten very into this little Chrome plugin called Inbox When Ready. So when I go to my Gmail, I can't see my inbox unless I click on it.
Yes.
Also tells you how many times you click to see your inbox. I'm at 23 times today. Did I really need to see my inbox? No, is the answer. That's not what I needed to do.
But it just becomes.
But distraction is really, I think it's a real issue. I don't think we have a solve to it. Once people are with us, they're with us with intentionality. But I think the hard part of the internet is that there are increasingly sophisticated ways to just be spending your time on it without intentionality. You went to Twitter because you meant to read Twitter for a minute, and now you're there 22 minutes later, just kind of like refreshing. Yeah. Instagram, I just took Instagram off my phone because like I would do it and I would just find myself there 10 minutes later and there was no intentionality. I was just there and I just couldn't stop, and like I was playing the slot machine. I'm genuinely like, I'm like hair on fire about this. Like, I think that we are destroying attention for all of us simultaneously. And it's like a crisis. Like, attention is like, I love the sign that our lives are the sum total of what we pay attention to. Now all these groups are in a weaponized way in these things that are with us all the time, trying to destroy our attention all the time. Like, I think it's a problem. I think we're going to do some damage here. Yeah. But Vox can only solve what it can solve.
That's within your view. Sonia, do we have time for a few questions? Yeah. Can we do that?
2 questions.
Okay. You don't mind?
No, they better be good, though, if there are only 2 of them.
Yeah, they're from high school students.
Yeah, we're looking for premium questions out here. Yeah, no belly fat questions. We want premium questions. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try to get into this as quick as I can. You have said on your podcasts a number of times that part of what you like about podcasting is it's sort of like blogging in that you get to be iterative and you get to sort of explore ideas. However, one thing that podcasts and blogging, they're quite different, is that blogging allows for linking out, whereas podcast sits in this walled garden that's just by nature non-interactive. And so I wonder, is there a place or a new medium, maybe like Jupyter Notebooks or like sort of an open source sort of collaborative way where we can be informed but then also be part of a conversation?
Yeah.
I would imagine if that exists, Vox is sort of there. But that's my big thing, is sort of thinking about blogging versus podcasting and that kind of like interactive authorship versus consuming sort of tension.
That's a great point. I guess I'll tell you how I think about it myself, and then I'll take on the tech question. So for myself, my personal podcast, Ezra Klein Show, which if you're not listening, it's great, y'all. It's just such a good, it's really making things better. It's an interview show. So while I can't link out, there's always another voice there with me. It's never just me, unless I do like an AMA episode. In that case, I'm taking reader questions. So one thing I like about it is it is a space of dialogue. So it feels like what you're trying to get at that thing in blogging, when you're linking back and forth and having a discussion, it's just happening in real time. Now, not all of the show, I'm also on The Weeds, which is like it's also a discussion between multiple people, but it's internal to Vox. And then, of course, there are shows where people are just like, it's like old talk, it's like old radio. It's just like one person in a studio just ranting at the microphone. But it takes all kinds. I do think an interesting thing in podcasts is that so many of them are dialogue oriented that they develop ecosystems that you can recognize. People are crossing over from a bunch of them and you kind of know who's in a community with each other. So I think it has a little bit of that feeling. I do like your idea technologically. I think a lot of people are trying to get at this by offering in show notes, and like I always have like 3 recommendations to books at the end of my interviews with people. But there are certain things that technologically the podcasting medium doesn't do and that we're not able to control. But what I will say about it is that I actually think some of the ways in which podcasting is inefficient and we've not been able to like chop it up, dice it up, like get perfect analytics on it, have allowed it to be a little fuzzy and woolly and weird. I've become a little skeptical of the way in which we optimize everything. And I think blogging got eaten by like hyper-optimized super sites, including like mine. And having some places where there's some strictures on what we can do and some just like a little bit of mystery in the relationship between us and the audience and us and the product. I think it's good for there to be places like that. So I do wish we could link out in real time, like you could have that kind of quality. But I've come to respect having some spaces where there's some inefficiency in the system, because I think inefficiency can slow us all down, create a little bit more space for judgment and reflection, and a little bit more space for weirdness. And I do worry that particularly, I think it's easing now that Facebook has stopped being like such a main source of traffic for so many places, but the pressures towards homogeneity are bad, and I like places where things can get a little weird.
Cool. Second question. Nope. There's
So sorry.
Way over.
I needed to get my steps in today, and I went all the way over there.
So I'd like to know how you how you find new content, like say in the podcast realm. A lot of people in this room know why I'm asking this question. I'd like to know how you do that. How do you find that new space and those new shows?
I mean, I use your product, whatever that might be.
Talk about my product as soon as you're off the stage.
that just had pitch all over it. That was great.
How do I find new content? I find it through the people I listen to and trust and think about. So I'm daisy chaining off, right? I try to be pretty open to what I'm seeing recommended. I ask for recommendations from people a lot. People I trust, I listen to the things people I trust are recommending to me, the things they're referencing. So one, I do it in a pretty human way. It's people who have whose taste has been validated to me already, and I go off of that. The other thing is I'm not looking for that much new content right now. Like, I feel very overwhelmed. And so one of the things that I find I'm trying to do, like I guess what I'm trying to say is I've gone away from algorithmically generated content myself. So the way I read Twitter, which is now weird, is I have a folder where I've bookmarked all kinds of people's individual Twitter pages, and I go to them individually, And so I can read their voice all at once for a little while and see what they've been thinking about, rather than having like the feed like throw a million different things that are all completely different at me at once. I've been looking for spaces that are more cohesive and less distracting. And so when I find them, I tend to dig in on them. I've actually been downloading like the apps that different publications have. I've gone back to reading publications and front pages. I personally am moving away from algorithmically generated content and towards either content that has been recommended to me or content that I have a space in which I can trust and see some editorial judgment exercised consistently over an extended period of time. The kind of shouting of everything, like the cacophony, has become, I think, so loud that it's time for people to put a little bit of space between them and it.
Great.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you all.
Ezra Klein.